the Everything But Politics podcast.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Everything But Politics podcast. Today, it is great to be welcoming Randy Ojeda to the show, who we met in Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, and it is great to be reconnected. Randy, how are you, my man?
I'm doing good. I mean, any show that's had Joe Flacco on is a show that I want to be on. So here I am.
Thank you, Randy. So, Randy, we have
Yeah,
a lot of different listeners here. Let's just give our listeners a quick background on who you are and what you do.
for sure. Yeah. So my name's Randy Ojeda. I am a music attorney. I'm based in Tampa, Florida, but yeah, I do music law. So what does that mean? I do contracts. I do negotiations with record labels, management companies, publishing deals. I do a little bit of everything. Basically, all the legal work that musicians and artists need is what I do. Yeah.
Very cool. So, going into the gist of music law, what is the difference between just music law and what the broader term entertainment? Do you do any work with TV and actors?
Yeah, I do a little bit of that. So I guess I'm more generally an entertainment lawyer, because
Okay.
a lot of the law sort of transfers between the different, between movies and TV shows and even music. But in particular, I focus on music just because it's such a specialized area and it's where I come from. So I started out as an artist manager. While I was in law school, I started managing an artist named IDK, who's a rapper that you guys might know. Um, and after I started working with him, started working with more producers and artists, and just sort of built a management company while I was in law school. And when law school ended, rather than becoming a lawyer right away, I just kept building the management company, and I built, you know, at its peak, I think I had 12 artists that I was working with. So it was like pretty busy. I had a small staff and business partner and the whole thing. And then while I was doing management, I started also doing A&R for a company called Symphonic Distribution, right? So um, I worked for them, did A&R for them, signed a lot of labels and bands to their distribution, and then um, during the pandemic was actually when I decided to retool things and pivot back to practicing law. But I had gained all this knowledge in the music industry and all these years of working with artists in the trenches and signing deals on both sides. That's my expertise. That's the world that I know, and that's where I'm most valuable. Like I can definitely do, if you need a contract for your movie or something like that, I can definitely do that. But music law it's really about your relationships and who you know, and how to get things across the finish line. So that's why I always describe myself as a music lawyer, not just an entertainment lawyer.
So,
Understood.
if I understand correctly, you essentially went from music manager to music lawyer.
Yes.
And how do those two complement one another, and how are they different?
Yeah, great question. So they definitely complement one another. Like when I was just a manager and I wasn't practicing law, all of my legal training that I had gotten in law school was still very valuable, because at the end of the day, I mean, you are negotiating deals, you're using a lot of the same skills, but the difference is, as an attorney, you're actually fine tuning the deals, and um, you're redlining, you're making actual changes to the contract and negotiating in a different type of way than you would as a manager. Um, it's just it's kind of just a different role in the artist's career, but it definitely covers a lot of the same bases. But typically the managers are a bit more hands-on, and they're working with the artist kind of day in and day out and managing, besides just the legal aspect and the deals, they're also managing every other aspect of the artist's career. So for me, I felt like as a manager, I was kind of capped at the number of artists that I had. Even 10 or 12 was like a whole lot of artists to work with, especially when you're dealing with literally everything that they do. Whereas as a lawyer, I can work with 10 or 12 artists in a week because I'm only being brought in for specific areas of my expertise, you know.
As a
Cool.
manager, did you find yourself doing mostly music distribution with them or booking gigs or a little bit of everything?
Okay, so a manager is actually not supposed to book gigs, right? So in certain states, you actually have to have a license to book gigs. So if you have a manager who's also booking your gigs, it can be a little dicey, but at the same time, I did book gigs, right? So just because like you kind of have to when you're starting out with an artist, right? Like you have to, if they don't have an agent, you have to kind of take that burden of like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna book some things and make some stuff happen. But the end goal was always to get an agent, right? So that I'm not the one actually booking the gigs. But I would say I spent a lot of time as a manager doing just kind of overall strategy, like when are we releasing music? How are we releasing it? Who are going to be our champions and our partners at press and at
Mhm.
Spotify and at Apple, and, making those connections, and utilizing my relationships in order to elevate the profile of the artist. That's what you're doing at the end of the day.
So were you helping them like distribute their music through different, was it only symphonic at the time, or were any of your artists with a label? Were they all independent?
It was a wide variety. So
Hmm.
we had some artists were on labels, some artists were doing self DIY distribution either through Symphonic or somebody else. Some of them were on, small labels, major labels. Like it was just, you know, I would never, just because I had a good relationship with Symphonic even before I worked there and while I worked there, I wouldn't push that on a particular artist if that wasn't the right situation for them.
Absolutely.
And Randy, I feel like, well, me personally, I'm unaware. When you do have a record label that is releasing an album, what platform are they usually using to release it on?
Usually they're using like their own internal platform, especially the larger labels. Like they have their own portals that they release it on. But a lot of the independent sector uses a company called Fuga. I can't for the life of me remember what Fuga stands for, but it's FUGA, and they are actually ones who they negotiate the deals on behalf of a group of labels. So Warner Brothers has their own platform, right? Sony has their own platform. The major labels all have their own platforms, and they negotiate with the DSPs, with Spotify and Apple and TikTok and all these
Mhm.
places separately. Whereas the independent sector, it would be insane for every single independent distributor and independent company to have to negotiate their own deals with all these platforms. It would just be a mess. So you have this organization called Fuga that goes in uh, and negotiates these things on their behalf. You know.
Yeah, well, so a record label like that is independent and is starting out and doing it on their own, how would they even go about creating a distribution website to then get into Spotify, Apple, and TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, they would. The easiest way is to kind of partner up with one of the independent distributors that's already doing
Gotcha.
that and already has that platform. And a lot of them can create what they call like a white label service for you. So it's like you have your own sort of portal that you log into, and it's branded for your label and everything, and you can release your music through that. But you usually have to work with somebody, and that's where things start getting complicated, right? Because obviously Fuga is going to take, I think they take around 15% of the revenue. Then this distributor is going to take another percentage, and then somebody else might take another percentage. Like by the time the money actually gets to you, it could be a lot less than
Totally.
what you're actually thinking you should be making. you know on already the fractions of a penny that Spotify pays. So
Yeah.
it's rough out there. you know
Yeah. Well, Randy, this is such a competitive industry with millions of people all, looking at the same mountaintop.
yeah.
We were fortunate to be at South by Southwest, as were you. An amazing networking event, shaking hands, kind of, running the rounds, doing the motions. where else is there a valuable place to meet, other minds in the industry outside of these big behemoth events?
Yeah. I mean, I think the difficulty with with this industry in particular is that, back in the day it used to kind of be centered in New York or LA, right? With, country in Nashville and hip hop and kind of southern music happening in Atlanta. And those were kind of the hub cities. But now with just the internet and the way the world works, like everyone is really spread out. Like there's labels in everywhere. There's
Mhm.
big companies doing everything. I'm from Tampa, Florida. Like the that's not a major music market in any way, but I would still consider myself a part of the industry, you
Mhm.
know. Um, so I think it's a lot harder to get everybody in one place without something like a South by Southwest or Indie Week in New York or Music Biz, which is in Atlanta this year, but it's traditionally in Nashville. Like there's a lot of these big conferences are great places to meet people because you're bringing everybody together. But honestly, outside of that, I've just found connecting with people like through social networks or even just cold emails at times can be beneficial if you're reaching out for the right reasons and trying to provide value, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so that's really the best way to do it, but it is a tough game.
Well, especially, if you're someone that needs that help, you're trying to distribute or reach more people with your music. What is the proper approach to reaching someone at a Spotify or an Apple or CAA or any of these huge companies that have such influence in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is to honestly go through somebody else. If you can find somebody who already has those relationships and is willing to, you know, put their reputation on for what you're doing, I mean, that's the best way. Because I mean, people at Spotify and the big agencies, the big players, like they're getting inundated with music every single day. That it's really hard to cut through that noise unless the right person is sending it. So, don't go and like buy a list of Spotify people to email or whatever. Like, don't do that because, yeah, you can get somebody's email and shoot something out, but the the value comes in who is actually sending that email to them, and is that somebody who's known and who has the reputation for sending good stuff.
Yeah, and so given how much music is out there today, right? I feel in the past, if your music was quality enough, it would find its way. Given the
Yeah.
quantity today, is that still the case, or are relationships that much more important?
Yeah, I think what's most important is being able to build community on your own, right? So obviously the relationships are a big part of that, but if you can cultivate your own fan base and your own audience, then you control the whole game. That I mean that's what labels are buying these days, right? Like they're not buying an artist, like they're buying an audience,
Mhm.
because they're not the ones that are necessarily developing the artists anymore. They're the ones that are, you know, just kind of putting fuel to the fire and letting the thing that's already building grow more, So
How much do they care about a social media presence?
I think they're caring less than they did in terms of like pure numbers. Like it used to be like, oh, you have 1 million followers on Instagram, like you could get a deal tomorrow. But now it's much more about the quality of the content that you're putting out, and that's the unfortunate thing is like it's not just about being a good musician. Like there's tons of great artists out there, people making great music, but it's like how good are you at marketing yourself and how good you are or how good are you at creating content. I feel like that all the time where I feel like I'm a part-time lawyer and a full-time marketer, because I'm having to sell my services and myself almost more than I'm actually doing those things sometimes. And it's the same way with
Mhm.
artists.
So for
Crazy.
for an artist that is
Yeah.
releasing music in the near future, I saw a video you talked about. There's so many mistakes that people make. What are the most important things an artist needs to do when releasing new music?
Oh man, so many things.
Hmm.
So many things. Well, first off, before you even release the music, you want to get your ducks in a row when it comes to collaborations, right? So that's the biggest thing. Like if you're just making music in your bedroom on your own, you know, you're probably in a decent spot. But once you start collaborating with other people, whether they be your friends, your brothers, or whoever, you know, you need to have agreements amongst each other that stipulate, you know, how much ownership each person has of a song, how much publishing percentage they're getting, you know, who's in charge of making decisions like, you know, can this song be used in a commercial? Can the song be used in a movie? Does everybody need to agree on that, or only can one person sign off on that on behalf of the band? You know, questions like that need to be answered through written contracts. That's the first mistake, is that people don't do collaboration agreements because they think like, oh, it's my best friend, it's my brother, it's my buddy, like nothing's ever going to happen. You know, we got a handshake deal, it's 50-50. But you know, in your buddy's mind, they might be thinking, well, I did a lot more work on this, so I should get 70-30, you know, and they're, you know, that's like a disconnect right there, where if you just had an agreement from the beginning, you wouldn't have to worry about what's everybody's expectations, you know. So that's the first thing, is not getting collaboration agreements. The second big mistake is not registering your music properly. And that's, you know, something that anybody can do. You don't need to be a lawyer to register the music properly. You just need to know where to go and what to do exactly, you know. And there's multiple performing rights organizations and different societies that collect your mechanicals, your publishing royalties, your, you know, digital performance royalties, like all sorts of different channels that you need to make sure that you're up to date with your music registrations. And
So as a legal representative, where do you
yeah.
send them to register their music?
So first one is a performing rights organization. That's number one, right? So in the U.S., the two major performing rights organizations are BMI and ASCAP. There's also CSAC and a couple other like pretty small ones, but BMI and ASCAP are the main players, right? So you need to register with one of those performing rights organizations. You can't register with all of them. You can only register with one of them. So you have to be registered with one of them. And that's step one. That's just like a baseline. Like everybody that's even involved in music needs to have an account with one of the performing rights organizations. So that's one. Number two is the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So they're a recent um, entity, like recent being like 2020-ish. They were formed and they collect mechanical royalties on behalf of songwriters and self-published artists. So you can register with the MLC and make sure you're collecting your royalties there. The next one is one called Sound Exchange. So Sound Exchange is they collect digital performance royalties. So they basically collect from, it's called like I'm sorry for being so technical, but like it's called
This is important information.
yeah, it is. It's called non-interactive streaming. So that's like something like Pandora Radio or Sirius XM, something where it's radio and it's online, but it's not something that you can physically interact with, right? So Sound Exchange collects those royalties, and then after that, you need to obviously have some kind of distributor like a DistroKid or Symphonic or somebody who's actually collecting those digital royalties. So, you know, there's a couple different buckets, and like this is it. It's hard to make sense of it when you think about it, like in audio, but there's some really good charts, and I could definitely share these with anybody that's interested, that kind of break it down so that you can see where these royalties flow. But that's like in a nutshell, what you need to do. You need to do a performing rights organization. You need to register with the Mechanical Licensing Collective. You need to register with Sound Exchange, and then you obviously need to have a music distributor. You know, if you have those four things, you're 95% of the way there. You know.
So Randy, someone like an Olivia Rodrigo who is with a label, is she creating her own ASCAP account, or is that everything being done with the label?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if Olivia Rodrigo is logging into ASCAP on her own, you know. It's like I don't know if that's the thing. But it's definitely something that is separate from your label. So,
Gotcha.
for most artists, I recommend doing it on your own and not relying on a label to do that. But what happens is, so, you know, basically with music, there's two kinds of royalties at the end of the day, right? There's basically two types of royalties. There is the master royalty, which is the sound recording, and then there's the composition record or the composition royalty, which is publishing, is what people call publishing, right? So there's two sides. So the label will collect your master sound recording royalties because they're the ones actually licensing that sound and that actual like song file, whereas publishing and composition is the underlying song. So it's the chord progression, the lyrics, everything that goes into the song. And that's collected by your publisher. So um, in the Olivia Rodrigo example, the performing rights organization that she's with, that ASCAP or BMI, they're collecting her publishing, whereas her label, I'm not sure which label she's on at this point, but her label would collect the master sound recording royalties. So it's basically different buckets that are being collected. So,
Understood. Yep.
sometimes that's where you hear about like the 360 deal. So sometimes there are deals where they will take from all of the buckets, you know? Um, but that's becoming less common these days.
Well, Randy, you mentioned the publishing and then the sound recording. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is another thing a musician or a band or an artist is supposed to do before releasing their music is to register the copyright for those two?
Yeah, so that's definitely another thing. I can't even believe I forgot that part of it. But thanks for the reminder, Ethan. But yeah, obviously like you can copyright both the sound recording and the composition with the US Copyright Office. So why is that important? That's the question, because if you don't register your copyright, you still get what a lot of people call the poor man's copyright. So um, you get limited copyright protection just because you were the one that created the intellectual property. So just by like putting the song out into the universe, you're getting some limited copyrights. But if you ever want to actually enforce those rights, so let's say somebody steals your song, and releases it on their own, if you want to go after that person, if your song is not copyrighted, then you can only get what's called actual damages versus like a statutory damages, which is what you get with a registered copyright. And the statutory damages are like upwards of $250,000 like per illicit use, so you can, basically if you have everything copyrighted and that situation arises, you're gonna be owed a lot more money than if you didn't
Yep.
have it copyrighted.
Interesting.
You know.
Another thing when you mentioned earlier about how much time you spend making marketing and promotional content, and the same for the music industry, it made me think of when you have music to promote and the music isn't out yet. So like DistroKid Symphonic, I'm sure they put your music on Instagram and TikTok, but if the music isn't out yet and you can't um, put the music in your video through the platform and you have to like upload an MP3 for that, how do you recommend protecting your music then if it's not out yet?
Yeah, so I mean, you can definitely, even if it's not out yet, you can still register with the performing rights organizations and you can still get a copyright. So I would recommend those things in order to um, protect your work in that sense. But again, you do get those limited protections just by creating something and putting it out into the world. Like
Got it.
it basically gives you like a timestamp where you can say like, well, I put this song out, you know, uh, April 9th at 7:30, and then
Mm-hmm.
um, the next person that releases it an hour later because they stole your MP3. Obviously it's a clear line of who did it first, but that's where things get really complicated, right? Um, yeah, if you just register with the performing rights organization, you copyright your music ahead of time. then you're really going to protect yourself from those issues. But again, that's something that like most, like 99% of people don't even do or think about. So that's why there's those limited protections,
Mhm.
in case something like that happens.
Have you ever experienced something like that where one of your artists or one of your clients has put music out in like promotion, or somebody got a hold of their MP3 before they released it and somebody else put it out?
Honestly, I can't think of a time where that's happened. Where what I've seen before is with producers in particular, clients, like taking beats, like ripping beats off of YouTube or something like that and rapping over them and then releasing something. That happens every now and then.
Mhm.
But in terms of somebody just like, you write a song and you put it out and then them just taking it and like re-uploading it or something, that only really happens in like certain situations, and usually it's caught pretty quickly,
Mm.
at like the distribution level. um because, and again, this is getting really technical, but there's like these like fingerprints in audio files that when things are uploaded to distribution, there's basically like a fingerprint that they know if you upload the same audio again, they can tell,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well,
Wow.
right. So I'm curious. You find yourself in an industry that's constantly evolving. How do you stay
Yeah.
on top of trends and keep yourself in the know?
Honestly, I live and breathe this stuff. Like at the end of the day, it's like this is what I spend my time on. So um it's at this point it's a part of me.
But are you
But
listening to certain podcasts,
yes, yeah, yeah. To be specific, yeah, I just keep up with a lot of different like newsletters, and different people like on LinkedIn and different places who are providing this kind of content. Um, I don't listen to too many music industry podcasts. I wish there were more out there that were helpful like this. There are a few.
it's a good niche for anyone listening.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I should do one. I don't know.
Listen,
So
you know better than
yeah.
most.
But yeah, I mean, I just I keep my ears to the ground, and I check a lot of sources and kind of keep up with this stuff as best I can. But it is changing all the time, and sometimes people will tell me like, oh yeah, there was like very recently there was a ruling on copyright and artificial intelligence. So this was like in the last like week or so, and somebody mentioned that to me, and I was like, oh, I didn't see that, so I had to go and let me research this. So I had to go and actually like look up the opinion and see what they're talking about. you know
And what was it?
so basically, the Copyright Office said that you can't copyright artificial intelligence, essentially. Like, you can only copyright something that has an actual human element. So somebody had to actually be the originator of the creation. And the argument in this case was, they said that they created the prompt, like they prompted the AI, so they felt like that was enough of a human element to um to be considered trade or copyrightable. But the Copyright Office said no, that just inputting a prompt on ChatGPT or whatever is not enough to give you copyright protection. Like, it needs to be, the origin of the creation needs to be a person.
Now,
you
my
know
question to that is, how would the U.S. copyright know if something is AI'd or not?
that's that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, right. And then what if
So,
what if
yeah.
it's originally taken from ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini, and then that person, whether it's printed out and draws and works on it, or they work on it on Photoshop, is another question
Mhm.
of how do you determine whose it is?
Yeah, and that's a $1 million question. I think there's still going to be litigation about that, because people are going to argue where the line is, and that's the law for
Well,
you.
and
You're not going to be able to tell.
one more thought I'm
Yeah, that's the
having
other thing.
too
Yeah.
is, if you did take it from AI, what is your benefit of copywriting it or not? Because no one else is going to make the claim it's theirs because it wasn't, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't made from another human
Yeah.
being.
Well, Ev, I think people like say somebody
Yeah,
takes
they
they make
might
a
want to.
logo on AI, they can take it, put on a t-shirt and sell that t-shirt.
Right.
That's where they would use it.
Or you could be the one that said you put the prompt into one of the tools.
Right.
Like there's levels to it. It's so complex.
It is. It is. And there's going to be so much happening with that in the next, decade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the ruling from the court is like, a preliminary basis, but as you can see, like this is basically what you talk about in law school is like you spend so much time arguing about where the line is for different things, and you look at previous cases and you say like, oh well, this person, the court ruled this element, so that's our precedent, and then like that's law school,
Mhm.
so there's going to be some law school papers and articles and stuff written about. I'm sure there already are millions about AI. You know.
No doubt.
God,
Well, because it's not
golly.
even just like the artwork of it. Like a writer in Hollywood has Chat GPT write the whole script for him. Then
Right.
what?
Yeah. Yeah. What is
Yeah, well,
what
who
happens
owns it?
then? Yeah. Is it? And that's why like like I also get a lot of like music briefs, right? So briefs from um music supervisors who are looking for songs for their TV shows or their movies or commercials or whatever. So they reach out to me, and most of these briefs say specifically like no AI music. Like don't obviously they always say no samples. They've said that forever, but now they say no samples and no AI. And
Interesting.
it's because if you're going to put a song in a movie, right, you want that song to be cleared forever, because you don't want to have to
Mhm.
re-edit the movie in 30 years
Hmm.
because the artist pulled the copyright. So uh, people are worried that what is clearable now might, because of a court ruling, might be totally illegal in 30 years. Like we don't know where
Oh,
this is going to go, so if you can avoid AI, like avoid using AI to make music right now because you know, we just don't know where that's going to go, you know.
Well,
God.
you personally, being a lawyer, do you ever use AI to help you, uh, whether it be break down a agreement or help you write an agreement?
Yeah, I try not to because well, specifically for confidentiality reasons, right?
Hmm.
So like I
Yes.
don't I don't want to just put client information into an AI learning system.
Yeah.
But occasionally I will ask if there's like something that I'm trying to figure out how to word, like some specific clause that doesn't have client information or whatever that I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, maybe there's another way that I can say this and make it clearer. I might put that into Chat GPT and look at that and see how that works for me. Or, if I'm, again, a lot of these concepts can be pretty dense. So it's like sometimes I'll write out a response and then look at it and be like, wow, they're really not going to understand what I just said.
Yeah.
So I'll
Totally.
take that, put it into Chat GPT and be like, please like explain this in a more concise or clear way, and I think like using AI as a tool like that, I
Hmm.
think is fine. But it's if I, there's lawyers that have gotten in trouble for like having Chat GPT draft their entire argument or their whole contract, and like you know that's a slippery slope.
For
And I
sure.
would say I would argue the same thing with music, where like a client of mine was showing me this AI tool that separates the audio in a track. So if you want, just the bass from, a Beatles song, you would put it into this AI and it would just remove the bass. Um, and like doing things or just take out the bass for you. So like using it like in a creative way where like, okay, maybe we can be better at sampling, or maybe we can do better, with the way we, you know, teach and learn music. Like maybe if I'm learning bass and I want to learn, a Beatles song on the bass, like I can just take out the bass line and play it on my own. Like if you're using it as a tool like that, I think AI is great. But if you're just going into AI and saying like, write me a Latin urban anthem, and then submitting what it does is like, that's just lazy.
And
Yeah,
that's the
I
crazy
think
thing about it. No one can tell.
Right. Because sometimes the AI is so good, like going back to the music brief thing. So, like, sometimes I'll get very specific music briefs from supervisors that say, like, we want a song that says the word focus. Oh, I'm just looking at my focus, right? So, like, it says the word focus over and over again, and it's about like concentration and then, very specific parameters for what they want for a song. Normally, I would send that out to my artist network and somebody would go into the studio and write a song with focus in the chorus, and then record it and send it back to me. So what I did as a little experiment was I um, put a brief into whatever the music AI one is, the big popular one. I think it's called Sumo, something like that. I don't know if you guys have used that, but it like
No,
basically like it's like Chat GPT for making songs.
no, no.
So I put in these specific parameters, and it actually sounded better than like what I was getting from actual people. And that was kind of the freaky part, was like the AI was closer to what they were looking for than actual people. That's crazy to me.
crazy.
So you
Great.
were mentioning the briefs that you've been
Yeah.
getting. Are these from labels or are they from artists or managers or?
Yeah, so briefs are that's specific shorthand for music supervision briefs. So those are specifically coming from music supervisors or sync agents who are looking to place songs in movies and TV shows and stuff. So um that's why they're so specific, because they're like, we have a 15-second spot where, people are dancing in the club, and we need music that, is dancey and club worthy, but, also doesn't mention this or that.
So
Um
when it comes to sync licensing, what is your advice to independent artists who want to tap into the world of sync licensing, but maybe don't know where to begin?
Yeah, I would start with looking at like there's different music libraries that you can sign your music up on. I don't want to name any in particular because there's a lot. Um, but starting with that, I think, is a good way to get your foot in the door. Because these libraries basically will, have a collection of thousands of songs or whatever, and then music supervisors can just kind of go through them on their own and find the songs. And you need to be very careful with the deal that you sign with a music library, because sometimes they take all the rights, and sometimes they, their payouts aren't great. Like they're taking a bigger cut than they should, but that can still be a great way to like get started, especially with, I never like to call music like throwaway tracks, but like if you have some songs that you're like not planning on releasing yourself, that you just kind of want to, maybe test the sync waters with, maybe find a music library that you can, you can put those kind of tracks on.
Absolutely.
And what is,
Besides,
go ahead,
oh,
Ethan.
go ahead, Ev.
I was gonna say, what is like a fair deal when it comes to sync licensing?
It can vary dramatically, so I've seen anywhere from, you know, like you're going to get $500 for this use to you're going to get $150,000 for the use. It really depends on, how it's being used, how long of a queue it is, whether it's a theme song or credit music. That can make a big difference. Commercials pay a lot better than TV shows and movies generally, because it's a commercial, you know. Um, so it really depends on kind of what the usage is. But the key with signing a sync licensing deal and licensing, your music for commercials and different properties, is that you still get your back end royalties. So you still get royalties from ASCAP and BMI every time that commercial airs or every time that TV show airs. And a lot of times sync libraries and sync agencies will try to negotiate that out, and they'll either get a percentage of your back end, or you won't get any back end at all. Like they'll take the back end. So something that I always look at with these uh, licensing agreements is, is the artist still going to get their royalties through publishing, or is it just a one-time buyout?
Mhm.
You know?
Mm.
In addition to having your music properly copyrighted and registered with ASCAP and Sound Exchange and all that stuff, is there anything else that these sync licensing companies want you to have with your music before they can use your music for sync licensing in a TV show or commercial?
Yes. So a couple important things. So one is the rights clearance. So there's a phrase you'll hear with licensing a lot called one stop. So what one stop means is basically there's only one person that needs to approve of the usage for it to be used, right? So if you're the sole copyright owner, if you own the track on your own, you're one stop because they just, you're the only person they have to ask. Whereas there's some, situations where, like, especially on a lot of these like big pop hits or, whatever, where there's 10 songwriters and 3 producers and a mixer has credits or whatever, all this other stuff where it's like, you have to clear it through all these entities to get this song versus if I just hit up, you know, Ethan and say, hey, can I use your song? And you say yes, and then I can hang up the phone and do it. You know what I mean? Like so one stop is very important, or at least a knowledge of who has rights in the song is the first thing that supervisors are going to want. Um, yeah.
And then on another note, which is kind of related to that, when it comes to the copywriting, I've read that when you copyright the sound recording and then the publishing, that there's a couple different avenues and ways to do it. I want to hear your opinion on this. They say that if you're if you're an independent artist, that if you want to copyright the sound recording, obviously you can copyright it under your own individual name, but is there a benefit to copywriting the sound recording under an LLC that would act as a record label, and then copywriting the publishing under a different LLC that would act as a publishing company? Is there a benefit to that long term when it comes to dealing with ownership and sync licensing?
There can be. So if you're an individual artist, it makes sense to just do it under your own name.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the sole copyright owner, but if you have a more complex situation where like multiple people are involved, there's multiple owners of the copyright, then it can make sense to have an LLC and do it. But very very nuanced question, so I wouldn't take that as full, ironclad legal advice. Like, definitely,
Mhm.
consult with somebody about that before you make any
Hmm.
decisions. But yeah, it could kind of go either way.
Well,
You know.
given you're working with so many independent artists, I would imagine most of them just register under their own names.
Yeah, most of the time. Most of
And
the time.
when it comes to, a label or a larger entity representing them, what's the approach there? I mean, would they want, can you move ownership of that given record?
Yeah, I mean, you can not only change what's in the performing rights organization data, but you can also um, assign copyright, to another entity, just the same way you would buy and sell like stocks. You
Hmm.
can give 15% of your copyright to somebody, and that's a big thing. That's like when people are buying catalogs. That's what they're doing.
How about, is that a thing in the podcast world? Like, you did a podcast for a little bit. Or do you
Yeah,
own your episodes?
yeah, yeah. Technically. So I mean, that's technically the intellectual property of the podcast. You know.
Then
Um,
do you start a city or a Cigar City Radio LLC, which owns those podcast episodes?
No, so the Cigar City Management LLC um would own the podcast, you know.
Therefore, owning the intellectual property being however many
Yes,
podcast episodes you recorded.
exactly.
And
Did
that's
And
you
what
really
about
go?
any
Oh, sorry.
what about any content, short form content or long form derived from those podcasts that was posted on the social media?
Yeah, so technically the LLC would own that as well, but each guest, right? So we used to have guests actually sign a waiver that would give us these rights, right?
Mm.
But if you don't have that, technically every person has what's called a right to publicity. So this is like defamation law, where if somebody were to put out a video of me um, that I didn't want out, technically I would have the right to, remove that video, right? Because it's me, but um, that's where things get complicated, right? So that's where you need agreements, and a lot of the industry is kind of just built on faith, and like we're not gonna rock the boat here, but technically that's a thing that could happen. Like somebody could come and say like, hey, we don't, we can't we can't let you continue to promote this or whatever.
Do you feel that when you asked them to sign, did it ever kill the organicness of the podcast?
No, I mean, we always did, we didn't start doing like remote podcasts until later. So most of our podcasts were in person and they were just like fine with it. So
Got it. Okay.
Randy, something that comes to mind when you mention that the person has the right for the videos to be removed, the first thing I think of is Dave Portnoy when New York Post and all those other news articles were bashing him and saying he did this and that, and he had no
mhm.
way of ever getting it deleted. How does someone go about something like that?
So that is where it gets complicated. So if you're what's called a public figure, right?
Mhm.
You have to show a higher burden of like people revealing your private secrets than a private like citizen, like a normal person, So somebody like Dave Portnoy, um, you know, if he's filmed doing something outrageous, like because he's a public figure, he has to prove that not only is whatever they're showing false, but he's got to show that it's like there's malicious intent behind
Mm.
the release of this stuff, and it's a lot harder to get those kinds of things taken down versus like if you're just a
Yeah,
private
absolutely.
citizen. Yeah.
What, and then I would imagine that not the exact same, but defamation's not too far off from that either.
Yeah, that's kind of the defamation standard.
Okay.
So
But like, how are you going to determine who's a public figure versus who's not? Right? You could make the case that anyone is a public figure that walks out of their home or posts on social media.
yeah, well, and then that's the other thing is then there's other standards, right? So I feel like I'm teaching a law school class now. It's like there's if do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Is somebody going into your home and videotaping you while you're sitting on the couch, or
Yeah,
are
okay.
you at Disney World acting a fool?
I see
Like
that.
that's
Okay.
you know
Yeah. Well, once again, it just what a world, man. There's so many
there
levels to this legal.
everything is gray in legal world, and it's hard to not every situation fits into a box, so you really you know you have to try to make things as clear as you possibly can in contracts and in agreements ahead of time. But you can see how like not having these contracts can just open up cans of worms for
I I
for
see that.
artists and whatever.
Well, so Randy,
So
a lot of complexities in your world. When you are, working and grinding and, really doing your purpose, fulfilling your purpose, what is the most rewarding part of what you do?
oh man, honestly, it's seeing um seeing artists and producers and creative people continue to do the thing that they do, you know? Like there's what kills me the most is when somebody quits, right? So when
Mhm.
somebody's like talented, a great musician, a great artist, but because of the industry or because of their situation and life, like they just can't keep doing it. So, I love being able to, help people like maybe they quit their day jobs or they cut back on how many hours they work or whatever. Like I have a client who's, he's a music producer, one of the most talented dudes I know, but he's also a barber. And that's how he makes most of his money is barbering.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the right word, but, cutting
Cutting
hair.
hair, yeah.
Yeah, he's cutting hair. So he, you know, over time, he's been more successful at the music and has been able to lessen how much hair he cuts because he gets to spend more time making the music. And to me, that's the rewarding thing, is seeing people like, you know,
Absolutely.
get to do the thing that they love to do without having to worry about making money otherwise.
What is something in your industry that you once had a strong opinion about that you have now changed your mind about?
Ooh. Oh, I like that. That's a good question. Um, uh, I think, you know, when streaming first became a thing, right? I was very, uh you hear the narrative of how little Spotify pays and how little
Mhm.
money artists are making on music. And I still agree that, I mean, yes, Spotify pays way too little for the time and value that I think music has, but I've been able to see so many people pay their rent with their Spotify check, that it's really changed my mind on, um it's not necessarily that Spotify doesn't pay enough. I mean, they don't, but it's that people are in bad deals and they're not getting their full cut, or they're not getting as much as they could because the label's taking 80% and then this person's taking this percent and then that person's taking that percent. So by the time it gets to the artist, there's not that much money. But in reality, you can make a good living off of Spotify alone if you own the majority of your royalties. And that's one thing that's been eye-opening for me over the years, is meeting people that, like I said, are paying their rent with Spotify.
And all that being said, Randy, where do you see the future of music going?
Oh man. um wow. I don't know. If I knew, I would be a lot richer than I am, but it's like, where do we go from streaming? Like, what's the next evolution of that? I think, in some ways, people are going back to physical collections, and like vinyl sales are going up and people are buying more music physically than they were for a long time. But the cat's out of the bag with streaming. Like, I use streaming services. Like, I'm not going to stop.
Hmm.
It's just too convenient, and
Everyone
it's
does.
too accessible. So I don't know where they go. Do
It,
they implant streaming chips in our brain? I don't know.
Maybe Chat
well, that's
GBT
what.
has an answer.
Yeah.
Maybe let's ask ChatGPT to
It
Right.
might
find
have the
out.
answer.
Yeah, yeah,
Randy, keep fighting the fight. Keep helping this next generation of artists. We appreciate you giving us your time and energy here, and
yeah,
it's great to have you on the show, man. So thanks a lot.
yeah. Thanks for having me. It was fun. Hopefully, I wasn't too
Yeah.
technical.
That was
That was
perfect.
great.
I can really get in the weeds about this stuff.
The
Thank
beauty, the
you.
beauty of episodes like this is that whenever you need that quick refresh, this is one of those episodes that it doesn't necessarily fall in a certain period of time. It's one that you could always go back and listen to
Yeah.
refine and just sharpen your memory, which is very nice. So thank you for your tidbits.
Yes, evergreen content. That's what that is.
Timeless.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
timeless. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. And Randy, where can everyone find you and what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm at real Randy Ojeda on all the social networks. So don't follow the fake Randy Ojeda, follow the real Randy Ojeda. I also very recently, if you're a musician or somebody trying to work in the industry, I very recently started a Discord server, the Randy Ojeda Law Discord. And that was something that idea came to me from a conversation at South by Southwest. So sorry to go on a quick tangent, but
Oh,
Go
good.
for it.
um, the I was talking to somebody about how people are kind of flocking away from the social networks because your grandma's on Instagram and your mom's on Instagram, and like nobody, it's not like cool anymore to be like
Hmm.
on these big networks, and people are moving to small private communities like Discord and Reddit and Patreon and places like
Hmm.
that. So the light bulb kind of went off, and I was like, man, I would really love to have a place where my community is available, and in one spot. And Discord seemed to be the best option for that. So I started the Discord a few weeks ago. We're at around 200 members right now, and
Amazing.
growing. So it's all, it's musicians, it's A&Rs, it's people in the industry,
Wow.
it's managers, and we have a lot of great discussions, and it's been fun so far. So I'm hoping to
Amazing.
continue growing that. So if you're
I'm gonna have to
listening to
make a
this,
Discord and join.
Yeah, we
I've never
look
join.
been on
forward to
Discord.
joining.
yeah,
Yeah.
join the Discord, jump in the conversation. If you're
Absolutely.
listening to this, if
Most
you can't
definitely.
find the link, DM me.
I'll
I'll
put
get
it.
you the
I'll
link.
put it in the bio.
That's what's up, Evan.
Yeah.
Anyone that wants to connect with you personally, what, LinkedIn message, DM, what's the best way to reach you?
Honestly, the Discord now is
Discord,
probably the
okay.
best way.
I like
Yeah,
that.
but Instagram DMs are usually pretty good. I've been getting better with my LinkedIn messages. But for a while my LinkedIn was kind of a dumpster fire. But I've since spent some more time on it, so that would probably work too. Honestly, I'm on all the things. I'm on all the social networks. Like, however you want to get a hold of me, I will do my best to respond.
Amazing.
And email always works. I'm just randy@randyojedalaw.com. So
Amazing.
Perfect.
Randy, thank you so much, my man.
all right,
Appreciate it.
guys. Thanks for having me. Have
You
a
got
good
it.
one.